Hello and welcome to the case of the prosecution for Preston Manor. On the night we did several experiments. We had auto writing, audio lights, EVP, CCTV, to name but a few. Now what I'd suggest is that let's cover some of the evidence that we did gather. Now I'd suggest that with any investigation, especially when it's conducted over a short period of time, in terms of just a block of a few hours, your evidence is going to be fragmented, and there's going to be lots of little bits of evidence which aren't particularly deep because you don't have the time to really get down to them. But what I would say to you is that let's go through some of these bits and try and tie them together. Okay, automatic writing. Every group experienced, in fact, sorry, 3 groups experienced the definite response on the automatic writing with the letter A or V. Now both letters are important to Preston Manor. A being of course the famous Sister Agnes, potentially, and V being much closer to home and not so easy to find or less public knowledge. V is in fact via Bennett Stanford, which is one of the sons or grandson. Interesting that these things came through and it was a shared experience. Also, we had communication through an audio light. Now, audio lights are simply something which you can place and they light up with sound, etc. Now, one of the groups used one of these gadgets as a tool in order to communicate with spirit, and what they managed to get was the light flashing in response to questions through things. So I'd put that down as potential evidence. Also, EVPs were carried out in the McCoy room. And throughout the building as well. Now, what was interesting about these, so we know as the groups we conducted these things, and there was silence in the group, so someone would call out the question, there would be silence, and then the recording would be the recording. Now, on playing those back, there is definite sounds in between questions. Now, they're not particularly legible, but there are sounds there, and there's even one of the clips has got the sound of women talking, etc., which is quite interesting because there was no women talking, I don't think, in the vicinity. Well, I don't think. I wasn't recording that particular clip, so I potentially have only got the team leader's word that there was no women talking at that location. CCTV was an interesting phenomena for us in terms of it didn't catch any spirits or ghosts jumping out of cupboards, etc. But what it did do, it had an enormous amount of interference on the upper floor cameras, which is something our cameras have never behaved like that before. And we've tested them since, and they haven't behaved like it since that either. So upstairs we had an enormous amount of strange interference on 2 cameras. Now, for all of the gadgetry you can have on an investigation, the one big thing is the people. There's nothing more accurate than people in terms of being able to pick up on stuff. Now, I'm not talking about coming up with, like, in terms of everyone's a medium, they can come up with names and dates, etc. But people are sensitive to sensation. They're sensitive to all sorts of environmental change that is potentially evidence. And now I would suggest one of the strongest parts from Preston Manor is the shared experiences that people had. 3 groups experienced the same thing independently in the same location as they went through. So, and there was about 4 of those locations where people shared that. Another thing that was important to note is that downstairs there was a pendulum experiment, and I think the defence have put the case through that it was a clock ticking which made the pendulums all swing together. Now that's very good, but what about the other motions of the pendulum? You know, when it did the circle and it would change direction, and I'm sure for the people holding those pendulums that was a very real experience, as it is when we're watching it. So I'm not prepared just to write that off as nonsense. I'm just prepared to put that forward as evidence. So for me, that's the summary of Preston Manor. Having a read through the case file, and please cast your vote as to whether Preston Manor is guilty or not guilty of being haunted.